power on.
Why would anyone want to buy a separate music player when they can just use their smartphone?
Okay, it's just a wild guess, but, personal preference.
But there's just no need.
Well, companies are selling these things, so there must be some people that are buying them.
But even Apple only sell one rubbish old iPod now, and that used to be their number one product.
The people who use them probably have a smartphone as well, but they just like keeping things separate.
Well, I demand that they explain to me why they aren't using their smartphone instead.
I don't see the point. You just argue with whatever reason they gave you.
This expression of free will is subverting my existence. If they want to buy a separate music player, they should have to put their reasons in writing to me first.
Yeah, that sounds completely normal. Are you sponsored by smartphones or something?
No, I just think that everyone should do everything the same way as one another, for efficiency.
So in your world, instead of an artist painting a beautiful picture of a landscape, they should just take a picture, because that's what most people would have done.
Yes, and they should take that picture on their smartphone. Hold on, that's another thing. Why do people still buy separate cameras? What's wrong with using the one on your phone?
All this moaning is actually making me better appreciate the idea of keeping things separate. Sometimes things just work better when they're apart.
Like what?
I'll give you a clue.
Okay, I'm waiting for the clue. I'm not hearing anything. Hold on, was that the front door? Is that a clue? Something to do with door. Oh, I'm not getting it.
Earth, 2019. Dominant species, human. Galactic potential rating, 0. Cultural affiliation, combination of government and global businesses, corporatism, legacy institution. Species still conservative, superstitious, and religious. Ecologically illiterate, largely unaware of cosmological foundation of love. Level of technological dependence is disturbingly higher than the galactic standard. Species distracted and behavior controlled by technology companies. System error. Advanced concepts detected beyond normal human levels. New galactic potential rating, over 9,000. Transmission type, podcast. Host, The Man of Tomorrow. Brian Sovryn. Source, Sovryn Tech.
Of tomorrow is here, and we are going to get into, well, it is your second episode for the weekend, actually. Had one come out yesterday. Make sure you don't miss this. We've done a lot of double loads lately, which is a classic, well, I don't want to say trick, maybe tactic? Classic tactic of mine to get as much Sovryn Tech to you as possible, where I would release, to make sure that you get the same amount in case I'm traveling or something like that, to make sure you get the same amount of Sovryn Tech, you would get episodes back to back. And that is exactly what you're getting this weekend, but then we should be back on a regular schedule. So to talk about what we have for somewhat, when we get to HackSec, it's actually going to be very much a sequel episode to what we were talking about in episode, boy, would that be 343? It was in 344. So does that make this 345? We're almost up to episode 350. How does the show do that? How does the show run so long? Going good 8 years. Well, that's because the Golden Stallion, the Man of Tomorrow, Savzu, the Rated R Radio Star, is always ready to bring this on. And, I want to open this one up. We were talking about, in episode 344, we were talking about what Amazon has released so far. this year. And the Echo Buds, all of that. We also happen to talk about in that conversation, we happen to talk about the Surface buds, or the Surface earbuds that Microsoft put out, which basically looks like a Mentos getting shoved into your ear, which I guess some people are into that sort of thing. Who am I to judge? But you want to look ridiculous? Okay. We're going to open this one up. Microsoft held their own event not long after Amazon did. And of course, both of these are coming after Apple's major event. And we've really been covering all of those. And if it wasn't for the fact that, there's plenty to make fun of with Apple because, again, they don't innovate anymore. They're it's such a horseshit company. But, with Amazon, they at least try to innovate. They at least will skip market sectors, shall we say, or market moves. And Microsoft, on the other hand, has finally done something somewhat interesting. Something that people have been predicting for a while, and not just predicting, but really it was based upon various patents that were getting filed, along with other leaks that seem to point at new hardware designs. Even if we'll get into this, but new hardware designs that Microsoft hadn't worked with before, and where they seem to be pushing things in a certain direction. Now, granted, what we're about to talk about, none of it is really anything original. It's not exactly innovative. It will just have Microsoft's marketing might, and I guess you could say app might, behind it. And so that makes it a little bit worthwhile talking about. But we're going to break into that. And then we have a very interesting conversation, I think, to get into. We don't really have a foreplay this week, or this episode, but we have a very interesting conversation to get into. Something happening on YouTube that has very strange ramifications that I think are worth talking about. And then we have a solution and resolution to SIMjacker that we talked about in episode 344. We're going to get into that. And then, if we have plenty of time left, I am going to review a movie that I had just seen recently, that being Rambo Last Blood. So, a lot to cover in this episode of Sovryn Tech. As always, why don't we go ahead and break into it? Now, out of the recent Microsoft event, I think there's three things that most people are talking about, even though, maybe four, but there's really three main things that everybody's kind of getting hot and bothered on. One is, of course, Windows 10X. Everybody's wondering, what the hell is this? Well, it's not that, in my opinion, it's not that interesting of an answer. And also, it's basically Microsoft admitting that Windows 10 is not the last operating system, even though that they had said that it would be. The main winners here with Windows 10X, it's a very slimmed down version of Windows. It's definitely, it's similar to, this is Windows 10X is really just the next iteration of Windows 10S. It's a slimmed down version of Windows 10, right? Somehow it can run Win32 apps, right? Legacy apps. Somehow it's able to run those, and apparently it's doing that within, what did they call it? Again, this isn't coming out until 2020, and I think Microsoft isn't, the Surface line is not going to be the only line of products taking advantage of this, but somehow there's some kind of container tech that they're using, and they didn't go into much depth on what I watched. I'll admit, I watch Microsoft events because, just like, even though I was falling out of being in any way like an Apple fan, and I used to be, don't confuse me, okay? I grew up with the damn things. I believe me, I was on. But, as much as I used to enjoy just I don't want to say not the craftsmanship, but just the masterful ability and presence and presentation that Steve Jobs would bring on. Panos Panay of Microsoft, and I've talked about this before. This is a guy who just has that ability, that similar magic that Steve Jobs had. And so it's I keep it in perspective. I don't really get excited about anything that Microsoft puts out anymore, because unfortunately, the reason I used to give Microsoft a little bit of a pass, right, is because they would never renege on any of what they put out there, but ever since what happened with OneDrive Gate, I just don't fucking trust the company. As soon as they said, gave us unlimited storage with OneDrive, and then they said, actually, we're going to cut you down to 1 terabyte and you can't do any more than that. It's 1 terabyte. Doesn't matter how much money you throw at us. I was just, well, fuck you. They were ushering in a genuine new era in computing, and then they just took it all away. Right. So I don't really get excited about anything, but I can appreciate the pomp and circumstance, if you will, that they put on. And so I do watch these things to check it out. But anyway, they didn't go into a whole lot of depth with how this worked with Windows 10X. But the main concern with Win32 apps is that they just drain battery like there's no tomorrow, because they're running in the background, blah, blah, blah. And somehow there's some kind of virtualization or container technology, whatever emulation that they're doing, that will keep Win32 legacy apps or software from draining the battery on this. That's kind of interesting, but well, anyway, there's that. Then the, ironically, and I love this, the start menu. I mean, Windows 10 proper has already been eliminating a lot of the animations and all this other wacky shit because just nobody was interested. Nobody was interested at all. And so Microsoft, and as we've talked about over the past few months, I mean, Microsoft is kind of saying, forget it with Windows anyway. They don't plan on making money off of it. Now I think they feel like they don't have to come out with new feature sets anymore, which could almost be a good thing. But the problem is that they're removing feature sets instead of just leaving Windows as is and not adding anything to it, which I think a lot of people would be really on board with, right? They'd love it if some monastic order was just maintaining Windows into eternity, and it just left it as is, as like Windows 7, and then that's it. But that's not what they're doing. They're also removing a bunch of shit too. But as far as some of the things that they're removing that are perhaps more newer features since, say, like the days of Windows 8, the start menu looks incredibly simplified. Obviously, it's meant to look a little more like a smartphone. Maybe that way people have a more unified experience between phone and desktop, which makes some degree of sense. But anyway, I mean, that part didn't surprise me at all with this. So, and then again, this isn't hitting until 2020. They showed an early build of it on what is the second most interesting thing on their list, which was the Surface Neo. Now, the Surface Neo is basically a laptop, but it's a laptop that has dual screens. And you know what that means, because it has dual screens, one of the screens functions as the keyboard normally. They also, I think that had, like with Windows 10X, it had a Wonder Bar on it that was kind of like a steroided out version of what Apple has on MacBooks, right? Where there's the bar at the top that's a little screen that can have a bunch of different buttons on it. This is very similar to what the Wonder Bar can do on Windows 10X. So, I mean, Windows 10X didn't really excite me much, other than it's clearly meant to be taking on Chromebooks, as is a lot of the Surface devices. I mean, a lot of what Microsoft talked about during this Surface event, if you want to call it that, was really to take on anything that Google has going on. So the Surface Neo, the idea of a dual screen laptop, this is not innovative on Microsoft's part. There's nothing new here. I think Razer's done this. Lenovo has done this. There are plenty of companies that have already tried this and have done it. Do I think it's going to work? Yeah, probably. It'll probably work fine. I don't think you're ever going to get any writers or journalists that are going to take this fucking seriously, because I mean, look, no matter how much lag you get rid of, nothing can compare to the feeling of the click of a hardware keyboard. Okay. And especially when you're a touch typist and all this, and you don't look at the keyboard, I mean, and when you're typing however many words per minute, some crazy number, you are not, I mean, you're not going to be able to function with a touch screen. And I don't like this. This plays into what we were talking about in episode 344, which was, the idea of HUI, right? Which I've been talking about which I've labeled for years, hands-free UI. But I was saying that, getting you used to not having a UI at all that you had any kind of control over was basically getting you used to touchscreen keyboards, which are just fucking horrible. Okay. But now it's just being taken to the laptop, away from the smartphone onto the laptop. This is a bad idea. Whatever. I don't care about the Surface Neo. they got to try it. I understand that. They have to try new market categories. They have to try and invent new market categories or something, just to try and stay relevant, I suppose, because, and I know we talked about this maybe 2-3 episodes ago on Sovryn Tech. The only way that Microsoft can really survive right now, granted they're doing fine on services with Office 365. That's making them billions a year. That's not a concern on their part, right? But what they do need to do is, to secure Windows and to solve this update problem, is that they have to build the hardware and the OS and the software. They have to do it all. Otherwise, they're going to run into fiasco after fiasco. Okay. And we've talked about this, that this is the direction that they need to go. Now, granted, Windows 10X, which again is just really an iteration of Windows 10S, a more slimmed down, even though apparently it can run legacy apps, but it's still a less powerful version of Windows. Maybe this would, because of the less powerful aspect of it, it would still allow OEMs, manufacturers like Lenovo, Dell, and so on, to, offer hardware platforms that will run all of this Windows software that people have been using for decades and not run into the update problems, right? That are just killing Microsoft right now. Okay. Maybe it'll allow for that, but that's definitely where they're pushing things. But I think they know they have to be, because they put out, they put out a lot of Surface hardware here. They came out with I think there was a new version of the Surface Desktop. Of course, it says X at the end. The funny thing is, all these devices have the word X, or have the letter X at the end of it, have that in the nomenclature. But only the Neo is running Windows 10X, which I find kind of strange. But something to understand, some of these, Windows X Pro or whatever devices that are coming out, or 10, or whatever the fuck they're calling these things. The names are crazy. Let's be clear on why they're doing this. We're going to talk about the phone in a second. Yes, Microsoft announced the phone. We're going to talk about that in a second, okay? But we got to get to this. Let's talk about what they're really doing here. Is that, Microsoft is in a shitstorm right now as far as media coverage goes, because everybody is ripping on Microsoft. Oh, there's another update problem. Oh, there's another update problem. And it's just happening over and over and over again. And they needed to, because some of these devices aren't coming out. Even Windows 10X itself, none of it's coming out until a year from now. Like the phone we're about to talk about doesn't come out until the holiday season in 2020. So why are they talking about it so early? In fact, for a lot of people, that could be seen as a scary thing, because how many of you have a HoloLens on your head? None of you, because it hasn't really been put out there for anyone. But we've known about HoloLens for years now. Multiple years. And we're already up to the second generation, basically, with HoloLens 2. And yet nobody has a HoloLens. That's a problem, right? So you might be scared that, Microsoft announced this, but then it's never actually going to come into fruition. I think the deal here is that this is the strategy that solves the update problem, like I just described. They're announcing all of it early. They want to get people excited, hyped up, and talking about Microsoft seemingly innovating. And probably to the average person, it would seem like innovating. Like the Neo would probably look like the future to the average person. Again, to anybody that's remotely tech savvy or keeps an eye on tech news, we know that these dual screen devices and laptops have been around for a while now from other companies. So it's not really any kind of innovation. But that's what's going on. This isn't just marketing. This is like a face saving. This is a disaster stopping situation going on here. Okay, they have to be in the news somehow with something new that sounds exciting and that has nothing to do with updates. And they need to be talking about how Windows 10X, eventually I'm sure they will solve this update problem. They've got to get out in front of that, because the stories, are almost by the day where an update is breaking something. You have people saying, here, look, you're going to want to preserve version 1903 or something like that. It's insane, the stories that are out there. Even I'm tweeting constantly saying, here, I have a patch for you. Just install Ubuntu, right? That's what I'm telling everybody to do. But that's how bad it is. Has it always been this bad? Sure. But now the media is right behind it, and riding those coattails. So they did announce also the Surface Laptop 3, which looks pretty impressive, and they actually let you upgrade the hard drive in it. That's been a constant criticism against a lot of Surface hardware is that it has shitty hard drives in it. And so now, well, here you go. You can put in whatever the fuck you want. That's a good move on Microsoft's part. I saw a story from Android Police that I thought was a little ridiculous, and maybe I'll talk about this in the future Sovryn Tech, where they were saying that the Surface Laptop 3 is basically a Chromebook killer. Okay, or it's a killer for anything that Google wants to come out with. Do I think that it was targeting Google? Yes, I think this whole Surface line is targeting Google. There's no question about that. Do I think that, any laptop that Google comes out with couldn't possibly be better than the Surface Laptop 3? Depends on what market we're talking about. But I thought it was a little, and fuck Google, but I thought it was a little hyperbolic for them to say that the Surface Laptop 3 is somehow, because even if Google doesn't make a great laptop, right? Like their next Pixelbook, let's say it does suck. It doesn't really matter because they did the, Chromebook for what it is. I'm not saying trust it. I'm just saying for what it is an OS done right in the modern world. I think we should have another conversation around Chrome OS, okay, and Chromebooks in general, in an upcoming episode, because I think there's a lot to say about it even now in comparison to what we've talked about before. I know we've revisited Chromebooks this year, but actually we covered a story where a guy said, look, I really don't need Windows anymore, and a Chromebook just does the job, and there's something to say around that. But all of this is clearly squared at Google and squared at Chromebooks/Android. Now, speaking of Android, that's where things also get interesting with this, because they announced the Surface Duo. The Surface Duo is a dual screen smartphone from Microsoft that runs not Windows 10X, but Android. Does this surprise anybody? It shouldn't. It shouldn't. Obviously Windows 10 Mobile's been dead for a while now. The idea of them going dual screen, Microsoft's treating this like it's some kind of innovation. They should have, let me tell you this right now. Okay, I'll break down the specs on the Duo. All right, we'll break that down. But let me say this ahead of time. This device should have been we've been following the development of a dual screen device for about 3 years now. Okay, like that. This is nothing new. We knew that this was coming from Microsoft eventually. It was called Andromeda or something like that. Everybody was expecting this dual screen device from Microsoft based on patents and other things. Okay, however, they really, and I can get why it probably didn't get released 3 years ago, not because it wasn't maybe already a finished design, but 3 years ago, they probably were still considering whether or not they were going to run Android or Windows 10 Mobile, because that might have still been considered viable for them at the time, right? So, but it running Android, well, again, it should have come out then, because the point there being is that you have the Galaxy Fold, of course, which is a fuck up. You have a lot of companies coming out with some kind of foldable or dual screen smartphone of some kind. Microsoft's, again, they're not innovating here. Yeah, they can say they've been working on it for 3 years. In fact, they specifically said that during the presentation. And I think they did that to try and sound like they were innovating, that they were ahead of whatever Samsung was doing or whatever any of these companies doing folding phones were in on. But no, you dropped the ball on this. Like you're not coming out as an innovator whatsoever with this. But it running Android, yeah, that's not a surprise. Again, Microsoft has clearly been developing. They have been pushing Android functionality with Microsoft apps as well as desktop shared functionality, right? With the phone companion app and so on. They've been pushing that for, the past couple of years at least, with, for what it is, impressive results, compared to the connectivity of, like Dell has tried to do this in-house. There's been Asus has tried to do this in-house, all with varying results, as to where Microsoft, going so far as to where you can completely, and I know Asus could do this too a couple of years ago, but going so far as allowing you to completely control your phone from the screen of your desktop computer. It's interesting to say the least, but it certainly shows how married they are to Android. And they can really only do this with Android because iOS is too locked down to allow for it. So for Microsoft to jump, Panos Panay, he was getting interviewed about it, and he says, "What, is it a shock that we're using Android?" No, he's like, the apps you want to use are there, so we'll meet you there. as far as Android, as far as like, does this feel like Microsoft is dropping Windows, because they are putting such a big push in Android? With Android, sure it is. That's exactly what this feels like. And it's more of where Windows is becoming, as much as, Panos Panay might want to say that, oh, no, anything bigger than a phone and we're dedicated to Windows. As much as he might want to say that, Windows, as far as being like the main way that you interact with everything, and it being like a common feature set that you use, those days are gone. Those days are gone. Windows 10X, Windows could be, in fact, we've even, seen the code name for this, right, which was Core OS. The idea of the Windows kernel being in Xbox, being in, pick your device, sure, that's going to be a thing, but it's not going to be the common way that it's not going to have a common language that you're used to interacting with across the board. That's just not going to happen. I can imagine that they are going to skin the Duo. Again, the Duo is not going to be out until 2020. They're probably going to skin the Duo to make it feel a little more Windowsy, on top of Android. Sure, I could believe that. But I have to wonder about this. Let's break down the specs on the Surface Duo. We're going to get into our main story here in a few minutes, but I just want to go over all these. So Surface Duo, it's two 5.6-inch displays. I have read from some people, so that makes it like an 8.3-inch presentation overall when it's folded out. Okay. And then it basically looks like a tablet, right? Because like your average tablet was 7 to 9 inches, so it's in that category. A lot of people have said that it's much smaller when you actually hold it than you realize or than it looks when you kind of see it, in a picture or something. So that's something to consider. It's just 4.8 millimeters thin. It does the full fold. It basically looks like a Nintendo DS, which is an important point to bring up as well. That's why I say Microsoft's also not innovating here, because in fact, I talked about this, I think in the most recent Wednesday Q&A. There was a couple who are backpacking in Asia. They were asking me a question about Nintendo and the Switch and everything. Because I'll talk about anything on those Q&As. You ask me the question, I'm going to get into it. And during that conversation, and it's something I've also said on this show years ago, look, Nintendo's the company that's always innovated in the consumer space. They just always have. They lead the way. Even if the consumer space isn't ready for what Nintendo's putting out there, they're always 10 times ahead of everybody else. And yeah, basically the Duo is, it's practically in the name, right? Because Nintendo DS stood for dual screen. It's right there. So they're just copying Nintendo. They're handing you the Microsoft DS, more or less, and it's not the 3DS either. So that just to understand what this thing basically looks like, that's what it looks like. And I don't think that it's a horrible form factor, just to be clear on this. Okay, because, I always like that clamshell design because it protects the device. That's why I always like, dumb phones, the old flip phones, right? And also, this will bring back the satisfaction, and because I've talked about this before, there's an absolute satisfaction of hanging up a phone call by closing the clamshell, like bam, it feels like you're just, it's almost like you're putting your hand over the person's mouth. Shut up, I'm done with the phone call. You know what I mean? So I always love that good, collapsing of the clamshell. So that gets to come back. I guess that's some kind of advantage as far as this goes. But anyway, yeah, it is a 360-degree hinge, though, so I guess that the screens can fold all the way back, which I don't know what purpose that would serve. This is something, to Microsoft's credit, like they have done in the past. They've done those videos. Well, they've been doing them since the 90s, but they do these videos where they try to show you like a glimpse into the future that Microsoft imagines, right? There was a video, I want to say from like 2013. It was actually an Office video, and it showed a device that worked pretty much like this, where it had screens that could fold out and you could hold it. Like this was an idea that they had. Okay, again, I don't think they're innovating on it because other companies had already done it before. Maybe not in a smartphone space, but still. So this is them. They've definitely had this in mind for a while. I'm not going to take anything away from that. I think it has the Snapdragon, the 855 in it. That's a nice move. We have no idea about price. The only thing Panay has said is that people will feel like that the price being asked for, you're going to get a lot of value out of it. Now, here's the deal. The concept behind this is basically the BlackBerry philosophy, is that this is a device for you wanting to get shit done. While on one hand, I can certainly see, and I have defended the use of the tablet form factor. Okay. It's never been about enterprise space, getting shit done kind of stuff. It's never been about that. It has always been about more consumption. I mean, maybe you could attach a Bluetooth keyboard, but that's kind of a fail with this device as well, is I think Microsoft should have had, I mean, it can be nice if it's folded out, okay, horizontally, and you could have a huge touchscreen keyboard. There's an advantage to that, to having the big buttons. Maybe that's what they're thinking. Because if you remember, BlackBerry had the original BlackBerry Passport, which I thought was a brilliant smartphone. It had a different size. It was a wide phone instead of, being more of a tall phone like we're used to. Okay, where we're used to phones being more vertical. This was like a wider phone, and it looked very strange, but it allowed it to have a huge keyboard and a lot of room to type on. And I think BlackBerry had something with that. I think they had an idea there. Now, if that's all that Microsoft means by getting stuff done, okay, I kind of get what you're talking about. But ultimately, the bigger screen is just about maybe consuming more content. Maybe this would become easier to read a book on, or to read comic books on, which are, I guess, a popular thing today for some. I mean, look, I love comic books. Just the comic book industry isn't the comic book industry I grew up with. So that's a whole other conversation. Yeah, I don't know exactly what they mean by this. What they should have done is I really think they should have accessorized the fuck out of this thing and had some kind of interesting keyboard that you could connect to it, a mouse as well. I mean, folks, the reality of the situation is, unless you're just talking about sending out emails, and maybe that's all that people really care about, but even that I think would be nice to have a keyboard and mouse. The reality is that, and as well as I do, and we've said this before, when you are sitting down at a desk at a real, not even a laptop, a real desktop computer, you got a big ass screen in front of your face and all this, you've got a mouse next to you, you got the big keyboard, the whole thing, you're getting down to business. Okay. Never, ever, never, ever, has a smartphone felt like, okay, I'm getting down to business. It always feels like some kind of go-between, it just doesn't have that same feel. You're just not going to get shit done with one of these things. It's always going to be a pain in the ass. So I don't know what Microsoft's thinking with this. Yeah, I get it. They have to make new market categories. I understand that. They have to please investors. They got to do this kind of stuff because Windows clearly isn't pleasing anybody. So they've got to come out with something. I understand that. But I don't really see any of this as a winner. I just don't. None of this really intrigues me. It just makes me want to run away from Microsoft even harder. Okay, now we're going to talk about smartphones during HackSec, actually, and because there's a bit of a conversation to have there. But everything that Microsoft announced, is great a presentation as it was, all of it feels like half steps, and just none of it feels like about getting shit done. And that's what it felt like initially with Windows 10, that Microsoft was reconcentrating on. They were calling everything the creators update. This is going to be about you creating content. None of these devices are really about creating great content, in my opinion. You need a hardware you need a hardware keyboard. You need a mouse to really get shit done efficiently and well. Even if it's for gaming. Come on. I mean, look, I love my 3DS. I love my Nintendo Switch. I get it with consoles. Let's all be honest with each other and admit that nothing, say whatever, there's some classic 90s first-person shooters that have come out recently, right? Like Ion Fury and Dusk and some others, okay? As well as I do, nothing compares. I don't care what controller setup you've got. Nothing compares to the keyboard and mouse for precision and speed of play. It's all bullshit when you're holding a controller in your hand with that stuff. You're just... Look, it's not even, this isn't a matter of subjectivity. You're just wrong. If you're going to tell me that it's more efficient and more effective and it's a better feel of controls using, dual sticks on a little fucking Xbox 360 or, Xbox One controller as compared to a keyboard and mouse. You're just wrong. And this goes true for all kinds. I mean, there's a reason that, quite frankly, I know what you're saying. You're probably thinking like, wait, what does gaming have to do with getting shit done? Well, believe me, okay, gaming is like one of the most precise things you can do outside of AutoCAD on a computer, okay? It's a great corollary to what other kind of shit you can get done on a machine, all right? It's a great example. So, with gaming, now you have the Nintendo Switch. This is something I talked about on that Q&A. Again, if you want to sign up to get access to those, just go to Zomia1.com. You look on the right and you can sign up. You get access to thousands of hours of original content and new content every single week. Let's be clear here. Everybody's so excited about the Nintendo Switch. I certainly love mine. I have a Switch Lite. I'm a big fan. Everybody's so crazy about this thing. They want this thing to do everything. And you know why that is? Because it's basically a tablet with hardware controls. That's all it is. Nintendo released a fucking tablet with great controls. Why are they great controls? Again, it's because they're hardware. It's not touch controls. It's something that has tactile feel to it. And for Microsoft to go the exact opposite direction, it doesn't surprise me, but Silicon Valley isn't learning their fucking lesson. So none of this is intriguing. None of this is designed, in my opinion, to get shit done. It's about consuming and who knows what else. The Surface Laptop 3, that might be the best thing that they have coming out. And again, I do agree. I think that is pointing squarely at the Chromebook. At basically any other laptop. The Surface Laptop 3 is looking to take on any other device that people get work done on. But then again, what is the point to all of the other Surface devices that were announced when only one of them is really about getting the business done? It's just odd, and this is a fail on Microsoft's part. I think it's a winner to go with Android because, again, Windows 10 Mobile, as interesting as some of the ideas on that were, and they were, where you could use that, and what was it? It wasn't crossover. Whatever it was, I forget the technology that allowed it to, where you could connect it to a keyboard, mouse. Oh, gee, you wanted to get shit. It's so funny. Microsoft knew this, right? That's why they came up with that whole bridge technology that they had, which is similar to what Samsung has. What's it called? DeX, right? Where you plug it into a little dock and then suddenly it turns into a desktop computer because they know there are times where people need to get shit done. And Windows 10 Mobile had the same idea where basically your Windows 10 mobile smartphone, you could plug it into a little dock and then that would connect to a actual mouse, an actual keyboard, not a touchscreen, an actual keyboard, and an actual huge goddamn screen so that you could get the business done. They knew that. They knew that people needed that to get work done. So I don't know what the fuck they're thinking with this. I just don't. So anyway, we've been talking about that for about 30 minutes now. We can shift away from that. But if you want to get the business done, and I mean the real business, what is the Golden Stallion talking about when he's talking about the real business? He's talking about business in the sack, baby. Woo! Whether it's in the middle of the day or the middle of the night, however you like to get your action on, let me tell you how you're going to do this. You're going to go to Sovryn Tech sponsor Blue Chew. That's BLUE Chew, CHEW.com. Why is it blue? Because it's the blue pill. And why is it chew? Because it's chewable. The first chewable, in fact, of its kind. That's right. This has the same active ingredients as Viagra and Cialis, so you're going to be harder than a cat scratching rod, quite frankly. You are going to be ready to go multiple times a day. But you take it, and it's chewable. That's great. For me personally, I actually can't swallow pills. Like, I can't. I have to do it with food, and that's a real pain in the ass. And, I think we all watched that episode of Seinfeld where we found out, right, how you start to associate food with sex, and boy, that runs into all kinds of problems. No, this one's chewable, so you can just chew it, and away you go, and you are ready to please your guy, gal, or NB, or whatever, and have a great time. Woo, all night long. You know what I mean? So, because this isn't just about, maybe you're getting older, and it just doesn't, you look down, and boy, Rodimus Prime isn't getting as hard as quickly as he used to. No. This could be all about even if you just want to enhance your present performance. So this is for everybody. You want to jump on it. That way someone will jump on you, baby. BlueChew, BlueChew.com, okay? BlueChew.com. And this is going to get your hookup. No, it's all very discreet. No doctor visits, none of that stuff. All gets done on the website. But I want you to do something for me. This is the most important part of this, okay? Next to the great sex you're going to have. I need you to use the code TECH, T-E-C-H. And that's going to give you, your first order is going to be for free. $5 shipping. Just use that code TECH. This is most important. Use that code TECH. All right? And then, well, anyway, get ready for the resurrection by erection, baby, as Powerwolf would say. Go to BlueChew.com, BlueChew, BlueChew.com, and get your hookup and use that code TECH. And we thank them for sponsoring Sovryn Tech. Woo! All right. Let's get into... There's a part of me that just wants to go right to HackSec. Now, you know what? We are going to go right to HackSec. How about we do that? All right. I'll be right back with some more Sovryn Tech. Woo! Let's go to a quick break. In 2014, he ran from Miami to San Francisco, raising awareness for Bitcoin and the homeless epidemic in America. And now he's doing it again. Blockchain evangelist and advocate for homeless rights Jason King is running across North America right now, from Miami to Santa Monica, right now. 5 years later, his commitment to promoting blockchain technology and fighting the homeless epidemic in America is stronger than ever. And you can help Jason now by going to blockchainacrossamerica.com. While you're there, donate to Satoshi Forest Sanctuary Incorporated to help the homeless, along with all kinds of other ways you can help. Get involved today. blockchainacrossamerica.com. That's blockchainacrossamerica.com.
HackSec.
Coming hot off the heels of the SIMjacker exploit, which of course we found out in a recent episode was far worse than even was initially reported, and really we're still looking at the fallout. It's still being researched as to just how many SIM cards, types of SIM cards, are affected by this, and, you know, then by default, how many devices are. Well, I had mentioned in the last episode, in episode 344, that we would talk about solutions, right? Because basically, as far as a device with a SIM card goes, now, there is a solution that can be put in place by manufacturers that's effectively a firewall for the SIM card. If, it's still just an if and when this is going to happen. I mean, there's no other way of saying it. It's a good while out. Okay. If and when. So in the time being right now, and again, let's be clear here, SIMjacker, it really is that simple. Where, I mean, this is one of the, you know, I think of like stage fright, heartbleed, you know, a lot of these really major exploits that we've learned about just in the past, past 5-6 years. I think this is on that level. And unfortunately, you don't have a whole lot of people talking about it because I think a lot of people are burned out on data leaks, exploits, and so on. As bad as this is, and it is bad, all it takes is you to receive a text, an SMS message. And from there, someone could effectively, again, you know, just own your phone. That's a problem. Is the Surface Duo going to solve this? It'd be interesting if they did. In fact, actually, I expect that to have an eSIM in it, even though eSIMs aren't, they're just as susceptible as any standard SIM card in devices, because this code has just been baked in and put in, before there were even smartphones. That was the point. So the solution, you might imagine, would seem to be very simple, wouldn't it? Don't use something with a SIM card in it. Or at least don't use it for anything important, perhaps. And there's a conversation to have around this that I've actually had. I did have it in a recent Q&A. In fact, the Q&A is specifically titled Android MP3. But it was fairly brief that we talked about it, and I wanted to do a little bit of a deeper dive here because, again, this is not, a solution like this, as obvious as it may be to some, and it's something I know that other Sovryn Tech listeners years ago had actually emailed me about. It's not something I'd want to keep behind a paywall, right? Or make you, keep you waiting on. So let's talk about it. Basically, what we're talking, how this came up on a Q&A was a person had asked a question of, if I hate smartphones, and that's not entirely inaccurate. If I hate smartphones, how do you deal with like having a smartphone? Like how can you, use one all the time and then just like consider them the bane of existence? Well, and I explained that how I resolve this is I actually take an old smartphone, okay, an older one specifically. So my daily driver, I don't mind telling you this, my daily driver smartphone is a Moto X4, okay, because it works with, it's one of the premier phones for Google Fi, where it takes advantage of all the tech that makes Google Fi something relatively unique. And we're going to speak more to that in a second. But the phone that I use for my consumption of media, because this is what makes it hard, okay, for a lot of people. Like when I say to you, okay, SIMjacker's a problem, we got to get past the smartphone, right? We got to go post smartphone, which ironically, Silicon Valley's doing the same fucking thing, right? Just they want everything stored on their servers and they want you interacting with those servers via voice. That's why everybody's, you have the AirPods, the earbud, the Echo Buds, the Surface earbuds, all these companies, every tech giant is jumping on top of this, of having very advanced things in your ears, because eventually they do want to get post smartphone and that's how they want you to interact. So the irony here is that I get looked at like I have, 3 heads and a million eyes, something out of the book of Revelation or whatever. Okay. I get looked at like that when I say, hey, how about you stop using a smartphone? But, Silicon Valley wants to go that direction and that's fine. Yeah. Just jam that shit into my ear like a pencil to give me a fucking hemorrhage. I don't know whatever. I'm used to that. Okay. I actually, on this show, not to navel gaze, I guess a bit, but Sovryn Tech, and the reason why I think it has had such a dedicated following, and it does. In fact, I was talking to people. I went to the Unlocked event in Boston from LastPass, and I met some Sovryn Tech listeners there. And I heard it from more than one of them that my show, Sovryn Tech, is, because Sovryn Tech kind of started off, frankly, it started off in like the Liberty movement. It really did. It started off, kind of offshooting from Sovryn Tech sponsor, Free Talk Live. Go to freetalklive.com to check them out. Woo! freetalklive.com. There you go. We got them in. It started in that. Doesn't mean it hasn't spun out and become far more popular. Anyway, I don't want to get into those, like what's popular, what's this. This isn't a dick measuring contest. Okay. But I heard from a lot of people that, like they don't even listen to really other Liberty shows, but they do still listen to Sovryn Tech. Okay. Now, part of the reason that I feel like this show has such a dedicated following over the years is because we have made predictions on this show. We have talked about directions that things are going, and 6 months to a year to 3 years later, because again, we're one of the longest running tech shows in the world, it ends up becoming right. It ends up becoming true. And so I firmly believe, and I'm used to where I say, hey, stop doing this, or hey, watch out for this, because it's going to turn into this. And it ends up becoming so, but at the time when I first say it, for a quick example, I used to talk about how, like these tech giants are basically, they're countries. They are literally countries with their own borders, foreign policies, the whole thing. They are countries. I lost so many listeners at the time. Now there's the dedicated that stayed on. Okay. But I lost so many listeners at the time, got so much flack from people saying that's ridiculous to say Facebook is a country, to say Google is a country, and so on. And then now what? Now, fuck. I was just looking at one of the latest episodes on the Twit network, and it was actually titled "Google is a Small Country." That was the title of it. Who's crazy now? You know how many times I've said those exact words over the years on this show? It's because I end up getting proven right over and over again. And this isn't to pat me on the back. I don't want to be right about this shit. You understand? I don't. But who's crazy now? So, as I've been railing against the smartphone for some time, not always. I mean, my opinion has changed. Okay, when you've been doing it for as many years as I have, that happens. You know, a grown person's allowed to change their mind, for fuck's sake. But I have been anti-smartphone, shall we say, for quite some time. And in fact, I had years ago, in fact, I have a book about this. And, you know, if you think it's just because I hate smartphones or don't know shit about smartphones, no, sorry. You're listening to the guy, I should say. You're listening to the guy that literally wrote the book on Android security. I wrote the book. That book came out of what I originally did, a series of podcasts called the Dark Android Project, which was basically, okay, how can you make a, privacy, anonymity, security hardened Android device? How can you do that? And you know what we started off with? Here's problem number one, the SIM card, where you can barely even have the illusion of security on an Android device. And iOS is no better when it comes to this, folks. iOS is great out of the box. Android's better if you know what you're doing with it. Okay, I'll make that statement clear. Actually, someone else, I've said that many times. There are other security researchers I know who have said that, and I heard those exact words also at the Unlocked event that I just mentioned, that I went to earlier last week. Now, I had said that the only way you're gonna get a tablet, you're gonna get a 2013 Nexus 7. I have held workshops on how to do this. Okay, you're gonna get a tablet. It's gonna be a Nexus 7 because you can unlock the bootloader, you can load Lineage OS on it, blah blah blah. You can go about the business, do your business. Okay, because the Play Store is basically a rootkit. But the first thing you've got to get used to is fuck the SIM card. You're not going to touch the SIM card. If you want to connect to something, and I mean, I've given whole talks about this, about the physical things you need to do, where you need to go to, as an access point to the internet and so on, how do you make that work? We don't even have to go that extreme for this. We're just solving SIMjacker. But the very obvious answer of how to solve SIMjacker right this second is to not have a SIM card. So, I want you to take, and many of us have these, especially if you're listening to this show, it's also a pretty good bet you're fairly tech savvy. I want you to take one of your old smartphones. Like I said, my daily driver is a Moto X4. What I did is I took my old Moto E4, okay, not X4, E4, and I use this as basically a glorified MP3 player, but it really can be so much more. And you have some options here. Okay, now some of these devices, depending upon what device you're using, maybe you can put Lineage OS on there. That's great because then you don't have to put the Google Play Store on there. But then you do run into some other challenges. Of course, something to keep in mind as well, okay, is that you don't have to log into a Google account or even create a Google account to use, like, say, a smartphone. Okay, now you have alternative app stores. You have Amazon. Now, granted, that comes with its challenges, right? But that's the only way you're going to get to use Audible in any reasonable fashion, okay, on one of these things. Because, again, the problem that I brought up on the Q&A titled Android MP3 was that the reason why people can't get rid of their smartphone is because the smartphone insidiously is the way that you consume a lot of, like, your media and content for your personal time, podcasts, MP3, you stream music from it, maybe even from your Plex server or Spotify or whatever. It's how you listen to audiobooks. It's how you read books. Maybe it's your ebook reader. A lot of the things that you do get done on the smartphone. But then the smartphone's not just your consumption device, but it also happens to be your main communication device. And because whether you're on or off as far as getting work done, as far as working, you're still using the same device for all that. It's always with you, and it's ever pervasive, and you end up giving it more and more information and feeding more and more bullshit into it. So what we need to do is separate the consumption device from the communication device. And in fact, limit the amount of communication that the communication device engages in and does, and that you do on it. That's the trick. And that's what we're talking about here, about how to solve SIMjacker. So are you going to end up carrying around 2 devices with you? You're going to have 2 devices, but you don't have to carry around 2 devices. Okay. And this works for, whether if you go to a job, or if you happen to maybe you do remote work, you're a digital nomad or something like that, and you work from home. Me, I generally work from, I can work from home. All right. And so what I can do is, even at home, is just leave the smartphone, okay, that maybe, has my phone number, might even have Signal on it or something like that. Even though you could put Signal on the other device, I can just leave that up on my desk and plugged in, and I will pay attention to it when I feel damn well good and ready, and I'll ignore it the rest of the time. Okay, now we'll get into a little bit more of what you can do for this in a second. But then, when I want to be listening to music, say off of Plex, or say I want to be listening to an audiobook off of Audible, or hell, even if I really wanted to look at Twitter, I suppose I could put Twitter on here. But what I basically do is, it's a device, okay, where now it doesn't have Lineage OS on it, but I don't log into Google on it whatsoever. I'm not installing anything from the Play Store, even though the Play Store still updates certain apps on it. Even if you're not logged in, but you cannot access the Play Store. But again, I don't see that as a problem. You can install the Amazon App Store, right? And that will give you access to to Audible specifically, and maybe the Kindle app if you use that for reading ebooks. And then you use F-Droid basically for everything else. Okay, and also actually the Amazon App Store will give you access to Plex if you're into that, as well as some other popular streaming services, Pandora, Spotify, go down the fucking list. Okay, there are a lot of, it is downright laughable of, what's not available on the Amazon App Store. I mean, there's a reason that Fire tablets aren't taking over the world. I mean, and they're really, well, actually in one sense they are, because they're being put into retail stores as far as like being used as point of sale systems, but otherwise they're not really taking over. They're not lighting any fires in the consumer mind, if you know what I mean. Okay, so but you have those options, and F-Droid has a ton of great apps to do most of the things that you could imagine that you would do in the Play Store. Okay. So you don't have to log into Google. You have that degree of separation. Yeah, you might have to log into Amazon. I mean, there's options of where you could just log in with different accounts, right? And then you don't run it. I mean, with Amazon, if you're going to do Audible, you know what you got to do. Okay, but you get the basic gist here, is that you're really going to run into where you're using the separate MP3 player. Okay, it's just a smartphone, but it's a smartphone without a SIM card. It's like a mini tablet. But you're going to use that for all of your content consumption. And then you're just going to leave the smartphone on your desk, wherever that desk happens to be. And that's the score. Now, if you want to be able to be in immediate communication with somebody, well, here's some options to do as far as that goes. Okay. One is, you're really not going to use Signal. I mean, you could, if you wanted, you could install Signal on the, on the mini tablet or the Android MP3 player, right? You can install Signal there, but you would just verify the text because Signal wants a phone number. You don't have to, the device that you install it on, because you could install Signal on a tablet, or hell, you could install Signal on a Chromebook if you really wanted to. Okay. It's just whatever, somewhere, something has to receive a text where you input the verification code, the 6-digit verification code into the Signal app, but it really doesn't matter where the app is. Okay. So you could do that if you wanted, but really one of the better options to go with is maybe use Telegram or Wire, or I think you could even use like Threema. Again, I'm not saying that any of these are better than Signal. I'm just saying you could use these where you have multi-device communication. And then even while you're walking around, wherever you happen to be. If it's at work, okay, you probably have a Wi-Fi connection that you can use, or whatever, or if it's at home, you certainly do. Then you could still communicate with somebody if you need to. I mean, I think this is a great idea right now to do anyway, is that, remember Verizon? Was it Verizon that used to call them your 5, right? Like your top 5 people that you talk to? You know who those are. In fact, it's funny because I always thought it was interesting that Verizon with the 5, maybe it was AT&T that did that, it doesn't matter. That telco more or less admitted that that Dunbar's number is real, even in our interconnected age. Because Dunbar's number suggests that you can only handle anywhere between 150 to 250 meaningful relationships with other human beings. You cannot handle talking to 5,000 people or 5 million or 5 billion, despite what Google would tell you or Facebook would tell you or Twitter. But the Dunbar number actually goes further. It says that, no, there's actually stages even beyond that. And as far as people that really matter, it's anywhere between 5 to 15 and probably closer to 5. So I always thought that was an interesting admission that the Dunbar number is an absolutely real thing. And it is a biological function, biological universal, if you will, within us. And I think for that 5, in fact, I think Facebook for Instagram, via the branding of Instagram, what did they came out with a new messaging app that's meant for those really personal, that really small circle. They know this. Was it called Thread or something like that? I forget exactly the name of it, but regardless, that just came out, I know. But they know the same deal that I'm about to tell you, which is that I think you should have a separate app. I mean, none of these apps are really going to have the great, the same level of encryption as, say, Signal. But I think you should have that app where, only your very, very tight-knit group, or maybe just your significant other, whatever, that you use that app specifically to communicate with. I think that's a great idea because that helps you control notifications. And that might be the app that you happen to also install, say, on this little device, which you can still lock down and encrypt and everything. There's no reason not to. You're not so much worried about speed with the damn thing. But anyway, create a separate consumption device. And if it's an older smartphone, great. And get all of that off of your smartphone and put the smartphone back in its place, where all that it has on it is, SMS, phone, and I don't know, maybe a few other things. In fact, you could even, with this mini tablet, okay, this non-SIM carded device that you're going to start carrying around with you, you could put through F-Droid. You don't need to use Google Maps. Through F-Droid, you could download offline maps, right? And you could pop it onto an SD card. You could put a huge SD card on this thing, and you could use OSM and that works. I've tested it. That works very, very well as a separate GPS device. So you don't even need your smartphone for a GPS. You could just go around with, with this glorified MP3 player in your pocket. You got to understand, folks, there's no solution to SIMjacker, and it's as bad as it could possibly be. Okay, so if you want to, and here's the other things that you can do, and then we're going to talk about connectivity. What if you need connectivity? Because here's the next thing. So what do you do about money? Well, you could probably put most banking apps onto this little thing if you want to. If you want to make this a really hardened device, you could, or you could go pretty far anyway. But you can install Bitcoin wallets on this. But Bitcoin has to connect to the internet, doesn't it? Well, here is a possibility. Okay. One of the nice things about Google Fi, again, fuck Google, but one of the nice things about Google Fi that really every telco should do, I mean, it's an absolute racket on any of their other parts, is with Google Fi, they don't care where and granted, if your smartphone has Lineage OS on it, you can do this no matter who your telco is. But you can do, where you can just set it for a hotspot, okay? And Google Fi doesn't care where the data gets used, okay? It just tracks the data more or less. But also the nice thing that Google Fi does is that it all puts it behind a VPN, right? Granted, it's a VPN going to Google, but it is a VPN that's protecting, the transmission of your data from any of the other tech giants per se. Ultimately, is it protecting it from the government? Of course not, but you get my point, okay? So you could, you could set that smartphone when you need to have, if you're out in the who knows where and you don't have a Wi-Fi, access point or something, and I don't know, maybe you need to do a Bitcoin transaction or you need to do some kind of horseshit, you could temporarily set your smartphone as the hotspot and then just connect to that hotspot. But that makes it a very intentional thing to turn on those radios on this device if you really, really need to do that. I mean, for me, it works great. Like, I have a 128 gig SD card in this E4, and I have just a shit ton of music on it that is all the music I could possibly need when I'm away from home or when I'm away from a Wi-Fi access point, right? I mean, like, if I'm at the gym, I still use this and I can just connect to my Plex server if I really need to, if I just need that song, right? And of course, if you're traveling, well, you recognize that, of course, you're going to take your smartphone with you. So if you really do need that always on data connection, you could still use the smartphone. But this starts to retrain us a little bit, and we regain that security that things like SIMjacker and really the privacy that constant connectivity has taken away from us. This isn't really a new idea on my part. This is just kind of the next evolution of the Dark Android project that I started years ago. But now we recognize, holy fuck, we need it. We need it now. And again, frankly, I mean, if you're not on, say you're not even using Google Fi, if you have a Lineage OS phone and say you have an account with private internet access for your VPN, I mean, you're going to have some, that's some pretty protected connection going through that mobile hotspot. I mean, the idea of the hotspot, that's going to become more and more of a thing. In fact, I'm amazed. Of course, I test out, new devices all the time. And I was testing out a newer Chromebook from Asus. And the connectivity between an Android phone and Chrome OS is pretty impressive. Like, they just instantly connect to each other, especially when it's like Google Fi. I mean, Google knows what they're creating here. They're creating an entire infrastructure that everything easily connects with each other. Granted, I know Apple has had this for a while, where an iPhone or Mac OS on a MacBook, say, or on a Mac computer, can instantly detect that there's an iPhone nearby and will, can access its internet connection, its data connection, right? This is a thing that it's going to become more and more popular. Whether or not Microsoft is going to, the always connected PC market category that Microsoft spearheaded, certainly what we were talking about earlier seems to be pointing in they're still trying to make that more of a thing with Windows 10X. But basically, you're going to be probably getting used to either a hotspot of some kind, be it through an iPhone or through an Android phone, and you're using, and some people might be using a Chromebook. Or in this case, I mean, this could be something where your consumption device is taking advantage of the hotspot from whatever smartphone you happen to have. So it's not like that wild of an idea. But ultimately, keep in mind, because I think you're thinking, wow, this is so goddamn inconvenient because, fuck privacy and security. All we care about is convenience, right? Isn't that, I guess... I mean, that's the only thing I can assume that people think, because otherwise they'd be doing what I'm talking about. But whatever. Okay, so if you do care about privacy and security, you can rock this. And just keep in mind that this really isn't about you carrying around two devices. It's about you having two devices. But you're really only going to carry around one at a time. So, and who knows, if you do have to carry around two, maybe the whole thinner and lighter thing that Silicon Valley is so goddamn obsessed with for no good reason, will work in your favor, because basically two smartphones today are the size of one smartphone 2 years ago. How about that? Maybe it'll go that direction. That's the other nice thing too, is using an older smartphone. I love how these are so much smaller. Boy, Microsoft's going to lose on this Duo idea, having that. I mean, even a 5.6 inch screen in one size. I know people are saying it feels smaller than you expect, but I don't know. The pocketability of that, I wonder about it. So anyway, this is a solution. I'm not saying it's the best one. I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong here, but it's certainly one that does resolve the problem with SIMjacker, right? Because that's the complaint that we always get, that everybody gets. As soon as you start complaining, somebody will complain to you, oh, all you do is complain. Don't you have a solution? Yeah, I have a solution right here. And honestly, or frankly, I think it's a damned good one. And it's a lot of fun. And it's great to retrain your brain to not want to look at that goddamn black mirror for every little fucking thing that you want to do, and, you know, have constant... I mean, the thing that inspired me to do this wasn't SIMjacker. I was doing it long before. The thing that inspired me with this is I was tired of notifications. I was tired of... I mean, I go into more depth on this during the Q&A that I had recorded. But... you know, I was just tired of, I mean, it's great when I go to the gym and I have this thing and I have this little mini tablet, like the only notifications I get, because I do have Telegram on it, the only notifications I get are from, like, you know, people that are very important to me, right? So that's good. But I don't get bothered by work, by clients, by anything. I'm in the gym. It's me and the music and, you know, and the steel, you know, and the iron, and we're just cranking it out. And it's so great. Give it a shot. I mean, you're going to be amazed at suddenly, it's like a whole new world opens up to you in a very real way. I mean, look, don't knock it till you try it. Okay, how about that? I've been told that my whole life. Every time I look at something, I go, yeah, I'm not really interested. And then I always get told, don't knock it till I try it. Or till you try it, right? Well, there you go. Here you go. With this one, don't knock it till you try it. Anyway, I'll be right back with some more Sovryn Tech. We've got a review of a movie to get into. And wow. What a bloody goddamn mess. We'll be right back with more. Woo! Hey, if you have a project that needs reliable cryptocurrency data, check out blocktap.io. Blocktap.io is a universal cryptocurrency API. You can get historical prices for Bitcoin and other digital assets that you can use to build charts and do market analysis. Blockchain data is also indexed, so you can get transaction statistics, address balances, and more for Bitcoin and other networks. Blocktap.io is free for personal use, and you don't even need to create an account to access the API. To get started, try some of the example queries on the homepage at blocktap.io. Again, that's blocktap.io. blocktap.io, and we thank them for sponsoring Sovryn Tech. Woo! Let's get back to the show.
The Climax.
And here we go. It is time for The Climax, where I get to talk about whatever the hell I want to talk about. It doesn't have to be science, tech, or anything along those lines. I'm going to get into some science stories, I think, in an upcoming episode, because there's been a lot of fascinating shit going on, especially in my favorite part of the universe, that being what comprises most of it, space. Woo! But that's for a future episode. For right now, we're going to bring this right down to earth and talk about maybe one of the most down to earth things anybody could talk about. That being Rambo. Woo! So, Ellen and I, earlier today actually, we went and saw Rambo Last Blood. This is the 5th film in the series, which is amazing to me. And I can tell you, as someone who's been a fan of Rambo films, basically my whole life. I mean, I've been a Stallone fan. Okay, let's put it that way. I've been a Stallone fan for basically most of my life. And I mean, I'm not going to get into that story here. We're here to talk about Rambo Last Blood. You know, did this movie do the series any kind of justice? Because, I mean, let's be clear here. The Rambo, even the 4th film, I mean, the 4th film did money and it got some fairly good praise. But the original Rambo trilogy is seen as, if not the greatest action movies of all time, certainly maybe the most consistent action trilogy, maybe ever, of its day. I mean, I've always had a very soft spot myself for the Rambo movies. I think that there's a lot more to them. First off, you have to understand with the Rambo films. I mean, how did my fandom for Stallone started with Rocky III, started with the Rocky movies, which were really great. They created, and I've talked about this before, they created the comic book formula. Okay, the comic book movie formula, they created that. But they had so much heart in them that they're actually good movies as compared to comic book movies, which are pieces of shit. So I love the Rocky movies. And then, it's like, oh, what else does Stallone do, right? And I mean, then you see Demolition Man, which is still a brilliant film. And then, you see, like, I enjoyed Tango and Cash. Hell, I even like Cobra. You could go down the list. And eventually you realize, whoa, we're talking about Rambo here. Because Rambo was a cultural icon. Now, I think the thing is that cultural icon is more based off of Rambo 2, or what's called First Blood Part 2, and Rambo 3, right? Like, most people see him as, like, the action star with the action quote unquote hero with all the great one-liners and everything, right? Like that, that's where the cliche, that's where the cultural icon comes from. Because if you actually watch First Blood is a well-directed, very well acted. Was it Brian Denny or whoever? Richard Crenna is great. Stallone does a phenomenal job in that. Very well written. It's based off of a book, right, by David Morrell. But it's a very tight, cohesive. That is frankly a Best Picture contender, even though the Oscars don't mean much. And granted, Rocky 1 did actually win Best Picture, but that could have taken home any Oscar it wanted. It's that good of a film, and I think people forget that because they've been so inundated with the Rambo of Rambo 2 and 3. Right? They don't realize that the first film is actually, is a very serious, very tragic, very well done film. It's, I dare say, a masterpiece. And again, I really do think that people forget about that. And they only know of the more cliches of 2 and 3. Not that 2 and 3 are bad. I think they're tremendous films. They're great action. Let's not forget, Rambo 2 was co-written. Who wrote Rambo 2? It was Sylvester Stallone and James fucking Cameron. Yeah, Titanic fans. Woo. So, these are not... There's what culture thinks about these films, and then there's really what's in these films. And I think that there's so much. These are more than just, they're great action, no doubt about that. I think the lines, as cheesy as they may be at times, are fucking awesome, and Stallone delivers them with such panache. But really, there's a lot more to these movies. I think that Rambo 4, or what is just known as Rambo, but I'll call it Rambo 4 for the sake of this conversation, Rambo 4, I thought, was a very, very strong film, and maybe has the highest body count in any other film that I can imagine. But I enjoyed the hell out of that movie. And it actually brought to light, much like Rambo 3 did, a very real situation going on in Burma. So, Rambo Last Blood, following up after Rambo 4, at the end of Rambo 4, you get, and spoiler alerts, folks, okay, at the end of Rambo 4, you have Rambo coming back home to America, and he's going back to what looks like the farm or the ranch in Arizona. And this movie picks up, I guess, a decade after that has basically happened. And now Rambo he's called Uncle John, but basically has like this family, a Latino family that he has become associated with. And we don't exactly get the backstory as to how that happened, but I don't think that really matters. Like, you don't really need that. What you need to know is that Rambo now, he owns this ranch or whatever. It seems more like he's taken this kind of family in, and really he's become this father figure to a gal who's about to go into college. Her name's Gabriella. And he's actually being frankly, when Ellen and I were watching it, the first thing we said to each other is like, wow, he's such a great uncle. Like he's this really great steward and kind of protector figure and everything, and really understanding, doesn't like yell at the gal or anything. It's a very interesting relationship. And there's a lot of things you don't exactly get told what it means, but you know that it doesn't really matter because you're going to see a Rambo film. And when you're going to see a Rambo film, yeah, there's some kind of message to be pulled away from it, but a lot of the plot points don't exactly matter, right? And that's okay because there is an overall feel that you get after a Rambo movie. Again, all of this is okay. Right? None of the Rambo films are ever going to match First Blood as far as being, just that really tight, cohesive film that just has it all and, has really deep meaning and a lot of this other stuff. I still think there's deep meaning to pull from these films, and maybe that's a bigger conversation that we could have in another Climax or at some point. Okay. But you know what you're getting with a Rambo movie. So now this movie, amazingly, Okay, before we even get into the review around it, this film has been panned wildly by critics. For one, they're saying it's too gory, which I don't know how critics are allowed to like the movie Mother, but then they're allowed to say, well, but Rambo Last Blood sucks because it's too gory. Wait, what? Okay. Yeah, I mean, certainly it's not the level of gore that was in Rambo 4, but there's some unique expressions of violence, shall we say, in this movie. Very unique. And I don't want to spoil it for you, because the first time that it happens, it's like, holy fuck, what, suddenly it goes from, because it's a very subdued film for, I want to say, and the movie only goes about an hour and a half, which you can't get away with much more in a Rambo film. Okay, it's great for what it is, but it needs to be that shorter shot. But for like the first 20 minutes, it's a very subdued film, very quiet. And then suddenly it gets to a point where, so we're sitting in a Rambo film, are we? Suddenly you realize that, it just goes from 1 to 13 in a second. And it's very well done how it gets to that point, and how that happens. So that's something I don't actually want to spoil for you. Again, this movie did just come out in theaters as well. I think it just came out September 19th. So as far as box office numbers, I don't know exactly what it's doing. I don't think it's doing necessarily horrible money, but we'll talk about that more a little bit later. But critics have been panning this right and left. They say the script is horrible. I totally disagree with that. I think there's a lot of little things in it where you might go, wait, how did this happen? But if you think about it a little bit more, you recognize how, say, like a certain group has this information and so on. The other thing that people are talking about is that, well, basically, I mean, this isn't giving anything away that you wouldn't see in the trailer, though the trailer really didn't give you the plot. I mean, you just kind of knew that Rambo was going to go into what seemed like one last war. Well, the plot basically is that this girl that he is a steward of, along with either a nanny, I don't think it's actually her mother, I think it's more of like an aunt or nanny figure, she ends up getting taken into, she goes to Mexico to try and find her father. And there's a lot to say around that. Because her father just like left her, but she's going to Mexico to do that. And she basically gets sold into a slave ring, in Mexico. Now, critics are also saying that this feeds into xenophobic, attitudes towards Mexico. I personally, and I am very sensitive to that sort of thing. I don't think so. I don't think that this plays into that at all. It made sense considering that last time we saw Rambo, it's in, he's in Arizona. So where are you going to go where, you can basically find like a certain lawlessness or bad guys that Rambo's used to taking on? It makes sense that you would use Mexico. I don't think that it's a decrying of Mexico overall, because in fact, you have multiple Mexican heroes in the movie, who are very much about doing the right thing. Okay. Also, Rambo has no problem with just driving his truck through the fucking, through like this little border barbed wire. Okay. So he's calling bullshit on the United States as much as he's calling bullshit on anywhere else. So I don't disagree with that at all. This movie has really proven a divide, I think, between what audiences want out of a movie and what critics say. I think there's a huge divide between what you could call maybe the Hollywood elites and what people actually want to see. I have to give, Stallone a ton of credit because I mean, he basically, I feel like he made this like an indie film, brought in some, not a necessarily totally untried director, but Adrian Grunberg doesn't have a whole lot under his belt, except for maybe assistant director, like with Apocalypto. Okay. Stallone did write the screenplay, did do the story along with Dan Gordon and Matthew. I can't remember his name. I saw it up on the credits, but it wasn't anything that I really recognized. Okay, but this is Stallone doing his own thing, much like happened with Rambo 4. With Rambo 4, it worked. I think with this movie, it worked as well. I completely disagree with the critics. I thought this movie, I'll start it off with the out of 10 before we break down a little bit more. I'm going to give the movie, I'll give it an 8 out of 10. In fact, Ellen also gave it an 8 out of 10. I mean, this is something, look, I mean, these slave rings, whether they're happening in America, or, Mexico, wherever in the world, they're a very real thing. And Rambo movies have always kind of brought this up, whether it's in Rambo 3 with Afghanistan, whether it's the fact that there were POWs left in Vietnam, and nobody seemed to give a shit, and so on. I mean, like these are, wherever you stand on the political spectrum, these are realities in the world that don't get a lot of don't get much spotlight shined on them. And Rambo amazingly does shine it on there. Granted, these are first and foremost action films, and certainly Last Blood brings that up as well, but it's not like these things aren't legit. Okay, that, whatever Rambo's taking on, they are very real things, which Ellen actually made a great point. I don't think she'll mind me quoting her. She said, they're kind of like comic book movies. Like they're like Rambo is a superhero. He's a real hero, but it feels like it's more enjoyable because that this is actually like real shit. Like Rambo, can only do what a human can do generally. And he's dealing with very real human problems. So it feels like a more realistic superhero film, right? Which, I think that's a totally fair thing to say. In fact, that's the same thing why I think a lot of the later Rocky movies work, because they are basically that comic book movie formula, but it's with real characters, instead of the superhero nonsense, which, hey, look, again, I love comic books, but you get my point. So that's a great way to look at it. Stallone, his acting was top-notch. There weren't that many cheesy lines really in this, but you get like Stallone-isms that just come off really, really well. You totally instantly get that this is Rambo. It feels like Rambo. Like it's a natural evolution of the character. I mean, he's basically a horse rancher now, but even that, I read some reviews that said they felt like that was out of left field. I don't know. I remember watching Rambo 3. I guess the problem is that I have a knowledge of history and I have a good memory. I think that's really my problem and why, I hate the world as it is today. But I seem to remember in Rambo 3, Rambo riding around on horses with the Afghani people and playing like their version of football. So why is that so crazy we clearly know Rambo can ride horses with the best of them. Why is it crazy that he would be a horse rancher? Sorry, I don't see the disconnect there. If anything, it's a beautiful callback to a fantastic earlier Rambo film. So yeah, Stallone's acting is great. The acting overall, I thought was just very well done. Everybody delivered what they needed to deliver. I mean, this is not a happy-go-lucky film. This is a very depressing film, I have to admit. But it does end off with an overall message that I'm going to get to. Okay. The music's being done by Brian Tyler, who has been in the Rambo franchise before. I thought he did fantastic work. You get the classic Rambo theme at points when you need it. When you get past a lot of the tragedy and you end up basically with the final battle in this film, the script really turns into very quickly, for like the last 20 minutes of the film, it turns into basically the A-Team, where Rambo's like setting up all these ingenious traps and all this other stuff. And you see that in the trailer. And I think it is ingenious. Is it very gory? Yes. But then I'm sorry. I'm pretty sure when I looked up at the matinee sign, it said it was a Rambo movie. I don't know what people are expecting. Sunshine and Rainbows? When they go see a Rambo film? I don't know what the fuck these critics are. I don't know. Oh, man. Again, there's a real divide between critics and actual human fucking beings. But whatever. And because the actual human fucking beings seem to be enjoying this movie. So yeah, all of that stuff works. There's nothing technically wrong with this film at all. In fact, a lot of the action, comes off, there's some CGI that I noticed, but by and large, practical effects, practical ideas that really deliver and work, and you know what's going to happen, and you see it, and you get the payoff with all of it. Even if you don't always initially realize where it's going to go, it does very much work. Some amazing explosions, which of course you certainly, expect and want in a Rambo film. And, and it all comes together in I think a tight hour and a half, some odd package that if this is the last Rambo film, it's a good one to end on. It's a nice way to end it. Stallone. Yeah, how do you separate the art from the artist? Stallone has talked about apparently doing a sixth film, where it would be on an Indian reservation. I would love it if they did that. I mean, this film does do really a, pun intended as far as Rambo goes, and people who know Rambo 3 know what I'm talking about. Rambo really does come full circle in this. You have a beginning to the character in Rambo, in First Blood, and then a solid ending to the character in Last Blood. Okay. But there is talk of doing a sixth film. And there's actually talk of doing prequels of Rambo before the Vietnam War. I'm open to either, but I would frankly be just as happy if we just have this 5-film series, and that really rounds it out. Because in this movie, I feel like the overall message from this film was, like, there's a great line where he's talking to Gabriella in the beginning, and she's basically talking about how she wants to go find her father in Mexico. And she says to him, you didn't let anybody stop you from doing what you needed to do when you were 17, referencing him going into the U.S. Military and, going to Vietnam. And Rambo replies to her and says, I wish somebody did. And I thought that was like, to have that condemnation of going into the military, which he did, which Rambo did. And granted, he does also talk about being a soldier. And in 4, you get a lot of, he has that little diatribe when he's making the knife that he's forging his own knife, which makes a reappearance in this film, by the way, from Rambo 4, where he's talking about, like, you've always been a warrior and blah, blah, blah. There is, and this could be a big conversation that we could have. There is a difference between a soldier and a warrior. There are two different things there historically. Okay, I'm not saying the outcome isn't necessarily the same, but there is a historical difference there. And, well, anyway, we could talk about that, in the future. But basically, this movie ends off with Rambo, and the whole movie just tells the story of the thing that matters in life is family, your loved ones. And it doesn't just mean, because Rambo doesn't really have a family ever. His family is always, say, his quote-unquote band of brothers of Vietnam, Colonel Troutman, or the people that he meets in whatever adventures, or this Latino family that, and actually it's pretty clear that they are Mexican, because the woman who's helping raise Gabriella, you see her later on in the film, and she's back in Mexico. Again, this movie I don't really think that this is racist against Latinos or Mexicans at all. Okay. But, taking in that family, whatever it is that family is what ultimately matters. Fuck the patriotism, fuck all that stuff, right? Because if Rambo is all rah-rah America, would he be driving through, like a border fence? No. So I liked the fact that this was the character coming full circle and realizing what really matters. And it's not an unfair thing to come up with what really matters. I mean, to me, I don't give a shit about any countries. I don't give a shit about any corporations, companies, or any kind of brand loyalty or any of that horseshit. All I care about are the people that I have chosen, not that I was born to, that I've chosen to love in my life. And, I'll do anything for them. And that's very much what I think that this film says. If you can, appreciate the fact that, yes, it's an action movie rapper that WRAPPER. Okay. As long as you get that, then this is a movie I think you can really appreciate. There's a lot of deep stuff in here. There's a lot. I mean, yeah, I don't know. Rambo touches some very primal things, I think, in a lot of us. These movies really do that. And part of it comes from some of the cliche, the over-the-top, little bit over-the-top action, and so on. Like, I mean, it just makes you pay attention. So I think this is a great way to end the series. I was very impressed. I think, boy, I'll tell you, this is one of Brian Tyler's best scores that he's ever done. The soundtrack alone is worth it. The action's solid. It's believable, because yes, Stallone's not a spring chicken anymore. Okay. He's an old man, I can kind of see why. I don't know how you would tell this narrative in a trailer. So I can kind of see why the trailer didn't really say anything. I didn't know. I'll be honest with you. I thought that this movie was going to be about like the cop, like, I don't know, the cop's son from First Blood coming and getting revenge on Rambo on his ranch. That's what I thought this was going to be about, because we had no idea what the plot was. I mean, I guess I could have read Wikipedia ahead of time. I'm sure somebody knew the plot, but I didn't bother, and I just went in there, well, let's see what unfolds. It was not what I was expecting at all, but then also I was, tragically / pleasantly surprised that it was something that was such a deep issue. So which Rambo, it really does. Again, get past, the cultural memes about Rambo and watch these movies, and they are often trying to say something, while at the same time having sometimes humor, having that character that gets it done. Rambo is a byproduct. It's something that it was a response really to what's called the sensitive 70s, right? And it's one of the best responses I think ever put together, one of the best franchises to respond to that ever put together. So I'm glad this movie has 5 films in it. I think it deserves to sit right up there with your Fast and the Furious, your Rockies, your Star Wars. You go down the list of them. It really, it's that damn good. And I think Last Blood, again, if they want to end it here, I'm fine with it. So anyway, we are going to, and again, both from me and Ellen, an 8 out of 10. So take that for what you will. We will end this episode of Sovryn Tech off right there. And, go check out the movie. Throw this movie some money, just because fuck the critics. Really, fuck the critics. I'm done. I've been done with these people for a long time, but no, I'm really, really done with them. There's a very strange divide between, moviegoers and movie reviewers and in some ways even movie makers. And I think everybody's going to be paying for that eventually. There's a conversation to have around that as well. But that's for another time, and I will see you on the next episode of Sovryn Tech. Go to zombie1.com if you want to get access to more of me. I don't know why you would, but maybe you would. So go there, get on the right-hand side. It changed from the left. Now it's on the right. Get it there, zombie1.com. That's it for this week's Sovryn Tech. I'll see all of you on the other side.
You just experienced Sovryn Tech. Go to sovryntech.com. That's SOVRYN tech.com. And connect with us there. Find links from today's show and catch our podcast feed. Sovryn Tech is copy heart. Copying art is an act of love, and love is not subject to law. So please share the show however you like. Welcome to the evolution.